Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. So I've been looking at the book Elizabeth and Margaret, and it's been a great look into the lives of the two sisters, how close they were to each other, and their mother and their father also. So today we're going to continue our journey with these two intelligent, charming, and beautiful sisters. While Elizabeth was growing up, she learned to be more confident because she was meeting people from all walks of life. In time, she gained charm, charisma, and she was empathetic. Elizabeth's mother knew that she was shy just as her husband was, and she gave Elizabeth some advice. She told her, "When you walk into a room, walk through the middle of the door." This meant not to go in apologetically, but to go in like you're in charge. And this came naturally to Princess Margaret. Princess Margaret, with all her confidence, would always be the younger sister. Elizabeth turned 18 in 1944, and she did a series of firsts. She downed her first stag, caught her first salmon. It weighed 8 pounds. She launched her first ship, the HMS Vanguard. She delivered her first speech as president for the prevention of cruelty to children. And she also attended her first official dinner at Buckingham Palace. Margaret was jealous that Elizabeth was appointed as Counselor of State. Usually you got that position at the age of 21, not 18. When one thinks of Queen Elizabeth II, they always think of her as being confident and unafraid. But when she was 16, she had to go to see the first troops inspection solo. And when they got near the destination, Elizabeth was so nervous that she went pale and was on the verge of fainting. Her companion gave her a chunk of barley sugar and told her to eat it slowly. The color came back to her cheeks, and Elizabeth did her duty with no issues. Princess Elizabeth wanted to do things girls her age were doing, but her parents were reluctant. Elizabeth kept pushing, and she was allowed to join the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service, and this really made Margaret upset. Elizabeth got to do physical labor, fixing engines, changing tires, spark plugs, and oil, reading maps, and navigating in the dark. Elizabeth said for the first time in her life, she got to test herself against women her own age. Princess Elizabeth didn't get home until 7, and Margaret was upset, saying, "I was born too late." And then Princess Elizabeth told Coffee, "She always wants what I've got." And then Princess Elizabeth started to have a love life. She entertained various young men, but she only had eyes for Prince Philip. In December of 1943, Prince Philip asked the Queen if he could spend Christmas at Windsor, and she said yes. They had an intimate Christmas Day dinner with only 9 people: the King, the Queen, the 2 princesses, Prince Philip, and 4 Grenadier Guards. And everyone had a chance to see the prince up close. He had impeccable manners, wartime heroism, and easy charm. The next evening, there was a bigger group. They danced to the gramophone, played charades, and Margaret loved that. Margaret was only allowed to dance with her father, and Elizabeth was the belle of the ball and spent the evening with Philip. When he left, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip continued to correspond with each other. Princess Elizabeth carried his picture with her wherever she went. Princess Margaret was jealous. Then she found out her sister had a lady-in-waiting in her own sitting room. She took private lessons and read and answered the letters she received, and this changed the sisters' relationship. Princess Margaret must have felt that even though she was more talented and intelligent than Princess Elizabeth was, she was always going to be in the shadows, never the star of the show. Princess Elizabeth knew that Margaret was more clever than she was, and Queen Mary occasionally was dazzled by Margaret. The year 1944, Princess Margaret began a relationship with her father's equerry, Peter Townsend. He was 29, a Royal Air Force pilot, and a war hero. The princesses saw him, and Elizabeth said to Margaret, "Bad luck, he's married." But Princess Elizabeth, she was only 14 at that time. Peter's wife was feeling neglected, thinking that Peter was spending more time with the royal family than her own family. Princess Margaret would stop by their cottage with her mother or sister and spend an hour or 2 in the garden with Townsend and his wife and 2 sons. Townsend would ride with both the princesses and was always ready to ride with Margaret. Margaret at that time thought he was more like a companion, a substitute brother. She felt she had someone on the same intellectual level, and they talked about books, art, and theater. Her father was with Elizabeth more, and Margaret looked to Townsend for guidance and consolation. The war ends. When the war ended, Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth moved back into Buckingham Palace and into their own apartments. Margaret stated that it was a nasty shock to live in a town again. The king started to host dances every fortnight in Ballroom. The princesses spread their wings and went to dinner and dancing at restaurants like Quaglino's, Mirabelle, or they would see a Noel Coward play. Prince Philip wasn't to come back home till 1946. When Princess Elizabeth got a picture of Prince Philip, Princess Margaret said that Princess Elizabeth danced around the room. When they were finally able to meet, they had a chaperone. If Prince Philip complimented her on wearing a style and color of dress, Princess Elizabeth made sure she was wearing something similar the next time they met. Princess Elizabeth's parents brought her some eligible bachelors like Hugh Euston and Andrew Elphinstone, but she never wavered in her love for Prince Philip. One courtier stated, "There really was no one else she could possibly marry but Prince Philip. He was blue-blooded with both parents of royal lineage, and he was the perfect consort." When Philip was released from his destroyer HMS Whelp, he asked permission to see Princess Elizabeth. A private dinner was arranged for them at Buckingham Palace. Margaret was the chaperone, and she acted as a footman as she carried a table and chairs into her sitting room. The princess, wanting to look her best, spent a lot of time on her wardrobe and makeup. And when they met, they were still true to each other. And Princess Elizabeth took him on a tour of her apartment, and she showed Prince Philip the photograph of him wearing a beard. And at this time, they were all young, and after dinner, the trio played tag and chase along the palace corridors. They played a parlor game called Murder in the Dark, which meant hiding away in dark corners with the lights turned off. Princess Margaret always was included in the duo of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip unless Croffy interceded. She stated it was always a threesome unless I took a hand and did something about it by removing Margaret on some pretext or other. When Prince Philip started making more visits to see Princess Elizabeth, other royal family members started to take notice. Queen Alexandra of Yugoslavia told Princess Marina, the Duchess of Kent, "I only hope Philip isn't just flirting with her. He's so casual that he flirts without realizing it." The Duchess said, "I think his flirting days are over. He would be the one to be hurt now if it was all just a flirtation or if it's not to be. One thing I'm sure about, those two would never do anything to hurt each other." Prince Philip was more royal than the princess, believe it or not. He was related to the royal families of Russia, Prussia, Denmark, and Greece, and was able to call himself the great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria. Well, Prince Philip didn't have a fortune, though. When his father died, Prince Philip was bequeathed 2 suits, his ivory-handled shaving brush, and a signet ring. His navy salary couldn't support a princess and a family. The royal secretary felt like Prince Philip was rough, ill-mannered, uneducated, an upstart who didn't show adequate respect for the court. Okay, but Philip's mother was born in Windsor Castle, and Philip had been educated in Britain and served with distinction in the Navy. He wasn't thought to have the right stuff because he wasn't educated at Eton or Harrow. Princess Elizabeth was aware of what some thought, but she remained loyal to him. The king had mixed feelings of what he thought about Philip, but he thought he was intelligent, he had a good sense of humor, and was someone who thought about things the right way. But the father side of him wanted to keep the family of 4 together. But Elizabeth at this time was 20 and had little experience of the world, and George VI thought that she might change her mind once she got to know the prince. Queen Mary thought differently, though. She told her confidant, airily, that Elizabeth would always know her own mind. There's something very steadfast and determined about her. The queen wanted her daughter to be happy, but she was afraid that Prince Philip would struggle in his junior role once he married the future queen. Margaret knew that her sister would wait out the romance to please her parents, and there was no secrets between the sisters, and Margaret deeply cared about Princess Elizabeth's future happiness. Prince Philip met with King George VI in his study one day, and Prince Philip formally asked the king for his daughter's hand in marriage. The king knew the day was coming and had discussed it with the queen, and he reluctantly agreed. He had some conditions, though. He felt that Elizabeth was too young to take such a big step, and asked that the couple wait 6 months or maybe more before it was made public. Prince Philip then took his love for a walk around the hills of Balmoral with the heather, and he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. The king at this time felt it would be a last hurrah for his family of 4 to go on a royal trip to South Africa. It was going to be a thank you to the people of South Africa for their support during the war, and this would be the king's last overseas visit. He admitted later to Princess Elizabeth, "I was so anxious for you to come to South Africa. Our family, us 4, the royal family must remain together." And it would give Elizabeth the chance to reflect on her romantic future without pressure. Elizabeth then realized the engagement wouldn't be formally announced until they returned home, and that was going to be 9 months later. Elizabeth felt depressed, which wasn't like her. The prince, in the meantime, had to go through the process of naturalization. King George VI also decided to have Peter Townsend join the royal family as equerry on the trip. He would have to leave his wife and 2 children behind. This meant that Elizabeth was to be separated, and Margaret was to have a British war hero tagging along, which made her happy. Townsend's wife wasn't too thrilled to be left out in a cold cottage alone with 2 kids, even though Peter would send her a diary of his exploits in the warm weather, while she and the kids were cold in the cottage. While they were on the voyage and the tour, Elizabeth was distracted from her duties by her feelings of missing Philip. She was always looking for mail. Margaret was filling her oats. She didn't have Alla or a coffee reining her in. The king's health at this time wasn't doing very well. His weight dropped and his smoking and drinking were out of control. The queen relied on Townsend to entertain the girls while she was caring for her husband, and Townsend was happy to do it. Margaret confessed to the lady-in-waiting Anne Glenconner years later that while she was in South Africa, she realized that she felt more than a platonic relationship for Peter Townsend. She said they rode together every morning, and in that landscape of South Africa, she fell in love with him. Townsend felt the same way in his book, and he wrote in his memoirs in 1978. And everyone, for the most part, felt that it was Margaret having a juvenile crush. Even Princess Elizabeth thought that was all it was, too. So Peter Townsend was someone who was easy to talk to. One day in the car, the king and he were having a serious conversation, and he realized that the king abruptly stopped talking and felt like, well, he's the king and he shouldn't be talking to Peter. And Margaret, she loved talking to Peter Townsend too. The king felt like Peter was the son he never had. Peter was the only one who could calm the king down when he got upset. When Elizabeth was in South Africa, she gave a speech on her 21st birthday, and the speech was heard by 200 million people. Wow. And that was worldwide. So she made a 7-minute speech, and she pledged her personal commitment to the monarchy, and she dedicated her life to serving the crown and the people, and that she did. So I'm going to stop the video here. Princess Elizabeth became 18 and wanted to be among her peers. Her parents let her join the Women's Auxiliary Service, and she got to work beside women her own age, and she found she could handle the physical labor. Margaret, being 4 years younger, felt left out most of the time. She was envious of all of Elizabeth's first achievements. Elizabeth showed she was human by being fearful at times of her duties, but with coaching from her mother and those there to help her, she learned to step into the public eye. It was during this time that she got closer to Prince Philip, which led to an engagement, and it was put on hold because the king and the queen wanted to make absolutely sure that Elizabeth was ready for marriage. The family decided to go to South Africa, and it was there that Princess Margaret fell in love for the first time, and Elizabeth made her first big speech, and they all enjoyed the splendor of Africa. So tune in again soon, and we'll spend more time with the royal family and see about their time in South Africa and get their insights into all that was going on. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. So I wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.